The storm did not roar, it screamed. 1,000 fractured voices tore through the void like beasts unchained, and among them came a single human sound, a shout raw and alive, ripped from a throat that had never spoken the language of gods or demons. The warp split open and spat him out, a man of flesh, bone, and uncontrollable flame, into a galaxy that no longer remembered mercy. His name meant nothing here. His laughter, his fame, his fragile humanity, all were ash before the monstrous scale of the 41st millennium. And yet something in him refused to kneel. The air itself trembled with a pulse that no machine could chart and no priest could sanctify. On a forgotten manufacturer moon beneath a dying sun, a mortal screamed his first word into the dark, and the Imperium shuddered, though it did not yet know why. For those who dwell beneath the corpse light of Terra, his arrival would not be recorded as history, but heresy, myth devoured by the hunger for order. What becomes of a soul born from chaos yet untouched by its corruption? Is it madness or revelation? Before we go further, I'll be honest. My heart sank when I saw that nearly 90% of you watch these transmissions but never subscribe. If this story stirs something in you, if it pulls you into the void and makes you listen a little longer, then like, share, and subscribe. That one act keeps this chronicle alive in the dark. If you wish to witness how a single spark of humanity defied the silence of 40 millennia, stay with me. The galaxy is vast, and stories are rare things that survive its fire. The Emperor protects, but the algorithm demands its tithe. He did not remember the instant the sky split open. Only the sound, that unholy rip in reality that swallowed everything it touched. One moment there had been the pulse of life, the noise of his own breath, the rush of the crowd and the beating of his heart like thunder against his ribs. Then came silence, absolute and endless. It was not peace. It was the silence of annihilation. The air folded around him, light inverted, and his body was dragged screaming into a tunnel of colorless fire. It felt like falling through every nightmare humanity had ever dreamed. The warp did not burn him as it should have. Instead, it reached for him like a living sea, sensing something inside him. Energy, chaos, motion, and reflected it back 1,000-fold. His every heartbeat erupted into sound, his every cry into lightning. The very fabric of the immaterium began to pulse with his rhythm, a terrible mockery of life answering life. He shouted in confusion and fear and refusal to be silent, and the warp listened. Echoes of his voice rebounded through the unreal ocean, multiplied until he was surrounded by his own sound, distorted into monstrous hymns that sang his name in a dozen broken tongues. He saw faces made of flame, the outlines of titans whispering through storms of memory. Fragments of lost souls brushed against him, whispering fragments of liturgies and curses. Man of flesh, they called him. You are noise given form. You are an error the galaxy will remember. He screamed back, but his words vanished into brilliance. The warp stretched him thin, pulling his mind across the boundaries of time until he was no longer sure whether the memories flashing before him were his or the dreams of dying gods. For what might have been seconds or centuries, he endured that storm. His body, if it could still be called that, spun through the molten current drawn toward a light that burned colder than death. In that light, for an instant, he thought he saw a throne made of gold and bone, and on it a figure too vast for comprehension. It did not move. It did not speak. Yet the moment his gaze touched it, every sound ceased. The warp recoiled, retreating from the silent will that held the galaxy together. The stillness was unbearable. He tried to scream again, and in that final act of defiance, the light flared and hurled him out of the immaterium. The fall ended in metal. He struck the ground of a dead manufactorum with a crack that sent dust swirling into the thin atmosphere. The air tasted of rust and oil, the horizon a maze of collapsed spires and silent cranes that reached for a sun long extinguished. His body trembled with the memory of impossible fire. His clothes, and the simple remnants of a life long gone, were half burned, torn by energy his mind could not name. When he opened his eyes, the world around him was silent again. Not the silence of the warp, but the silence of a grave. For a time, he lay there, breathing in short, frantic bursts, trying to understand what had happened. The stars above were wrong. Too many. Too still. All framed by the faint pulse of distant nebulae that glowed like wounds. He called out, his voice echoing against steel cliffs and empty conduits. There was no answer. only the creak of ancient metal settling under forgotten gravity. Then faintly he heard it, a low hum, mechanical, patient, alive. He stumbled toward it, each step dragging pain through his limbs. The hum grew louder, resolving into the rhythmic pulse of dormant machines awakening. Broken servitors hung from alcoves like corpses on wires, their eyes flickering. Cables shifted, releasing clouds of dust that sparkled faintly in the weak light. Somewhere deep in the bowels of the facility, a cogitator woke from its centuries-long sleep and began to speak in code too old for him to understand. He felt its vibration through the floor, and somehow it felt like a heartbeat. He shouted again, not from fear now, but from the desperate need to prove he was still real. His voice bounced from wall to wall, splitting into echoes that seemed to move on their own. The machinery answered with light. Rusted panels flickered to life, casting a dull amber glow over his face. The hum rose to a hymn. One by one, the dead servitors turned their heads toward him, their metal jaws twitching in half-formed words. He took a step back. The closest servitor convulsed, sparks dripping from its mouth, and then, impossibly, it spoke. Not in any human language he knew, but in binary, its vox grill spitting static like breath. The sound scraped against his mind, but beneath the distortion, he thought he heard something that could have been a single word. Signal. The word repeated, multiplied, became chant. More machines stirred, more lights came alive. Somewhere above, a broken vox tower flickered and began transmitting without command. The wind rose, carrying dust like incense. His pulse quickened. The air itself seemed to beat in rhythm with him. His confusion became energy, and that energy filled the space around him with life that had long been dead. He fell to his knees, clutching his head, the noise within and without merging into a single impossible symphony. He shouted again, half in fear, half in rage, and every light in the manufactorum flared at once. A column of white fire erupted from the central tower, reaching skyward, painting the ruins in ghost light visible from orbit. Far away, in the void above the moon, an auger array aboard a patrolling Mechanicus vessel caught a burst of impossible data, a pattern of frequencies that no machine could classify. The tech priests stared at their readouts, confusion flickering beneath layers of code and prayer. Unregistered transmission, one whispered through a vox filter. Origin, surface. Nature, unknown, but rhythmic. Below, amidst the ruins, the man stood, chest heaving, surrounded by machines that bowed their heads. The silence had ended. The galaxy had noticed. When he awoke again, the light had changed. A dull ash-colored dawn seeped through the broken roof of the manufactorum, revealing the scale of the ruin. Metal giants lay toppled like corpses, their frames eaten by rust and time. Rivers of solidified oil cut through the ground, glinting like obsidian veins. The air tasted of burnt ozone and old blood, metallic and sharp. For a long while he did not move. The storm of sound that had torn him from the void still echoed faintly in his skull. A private thunder that refused to fade. He pushed himself upright, the ground grinding under his palms, and tried to remember his name. The syllables came, but they felt hollow here, like words from a forgotten language. His memory stuttered, the crowd, the lights, the laughter, then broke apart like glass submerged in black water. Nothing that had once defined him existed now. Not his home, not the world he'd known, not the very idea of safety. Only the machinery watched him. Only the silence waited. He began to walk. Each step sent ripples of dust spiraling into the stale air. The wreckage stretched endlessly, an ocean of steel and decay. The colossal skeletons of cranes loomed overhead like broken gods, their shadows long and thin. In the distance, the faint hum he had heard before still pulsed, rhythmic, deliberate, impossibly alive. It drew him forward. Every time he faltered, the pulse quickened, as though it sensed his doubt and refused to let him rest. He came upon a field of statues that weren't statues at all. They were servitors, half buried, their flesh and metal fused in grotesque unity. Some still breathed, their chests rising in slow, unnatural rhythm. Tubes pulsed faintly where veins should have been, feeding dead systems with nothing but memory. One turned its head as he passed, its eyes flickering open like dying candles. "Praise the signal," it whispered, its vox grill wheezing sparks. Then it went still again. He stumbled back, heart hammering. "No," he muttered, voice cracking in the thin air. "Nah, this ain't..." His words failed, devoured by the wind. The servitor did not move again. The hum beneath the ground deepened, resonating in his chest until it felt as though the planet itself was breathing with him. Further on, the ruins opened into what must once have been a central foundry. Enormous conveyor lines hung from the ceiling, frozen mid-motion loaded with half-finished weapons. The architecture bore the sigils of the Mechanicus, cog and skull half divine, half mechanical. Everywhere there were signs of hurried abandonment. Rusted tools, scattered data slates, cooling vats congealed into lifeless sludge. The machines here had died without closure, without ritual. In the Imperium, that was sacrilege. He touched one of the massive gears, feeling its cold texture under his fingertips. Instantly, light crawled through its seams, crawling outward like veins awakening. Consoles sparked to life, vox panels whispering fragments of binary prayers. His pulse matched the rhythm of their awakening. His body somehow conducting a symphony he could not understand. It frightened him, yet the sound, the vibration of it, also soothed something feral inside him. It was as though the world was responding to his existence, pleading not to be alone. The hum grew into a song. The servitors in the shadows began to twitch, their ruined limbs scraping against the floor. Somewhere high above, a mechanical bell tolled once, the sound cracked and ancient. The air shimmered with static. Then the voice came again. Not human, but machine, filtered through broken speakers and shattered vox grills scattered across the ruins. Signal confirmed, it rasped. Origin anomaly. Pattern unholy. Initiating reverence protocol. He froze. Reverence? All at once the servitors began to move. Dozens of them, perhaps hundreds, crawling, dragging, stumbling toward him from the darkness, their eyes burning faintly blue. They gathered around him in a wide circle, their movements jerky, uncertain, as though obeying an order half-remembered. One by one they sank to their knees, metal scraping against metal. The chorus of motion filled the foundry until the sound became unbearable. He shouted at them to stop, but his voice only seemed to drive them deeper into frenzy. The machines bowed their heads lower, chanting his name. Distorted, broken, but unmistakable. Speed, speed, speed. The word, his word, had no meaning here, yet it became gospel in their mechanical throats. The vox grills screamed it in overlapping tones until the air itself trembled. He fell backward, covering his ears, and in that instant the foundry's lights blazed, bathing the ruin in golden fire. His body vibrated with the sound, and in some impossible way he felt their devotion. It pressed against him like gravity, ancient and terrible. He shouted again, a wordless sound, and the lights shattered. The machines fell silent mid-chant. Only the hum remained, faint but insistent, as though waiting for his command. He stood there for a long moment, trembling, surrounded by kneeling servitors frozen mid-prayer. He didn't understand any of it. Not the worship, not the noise, not the power that seemed to leak from his voice like heat. He just wanted to wake up. But the air was too cold, the rust too sharp, the silence too real. There was no waking, only survival. And somewhere above, high in orbit, the Mechanicus patrol that had first noticed his transmission had begun its descent. The sky above the manufactorum split with the shriek of re-entry. Lines of fire clawed across the dim horizon as drop shuttles knifed through the thinning atmosphere. Their hulls marked with the cog and skull of the Adeptus Mechanicus. The ground quivered beneath the old foundations, a deep tremor that rolled through the graveyard of machines like a warning heartbeat. He felt it before he saw them, the hum of engines layered with something older, a rhythm that almost matched the pulse of the planet itself. He staggered into the open yard, blinking through the haze. The servitors still knelt in silent devotion, locked in stasis after his last outburst. Beyond them, dust plumes swelled where the shuttles landed. When their engines cooled, figures emerged. Skitarii vanguard, their armor painted the color of dried blood, their limbs replaced by glimmering augmetics that hissed with the patience of machines. No words passed between them. They moved as one organism, formation perfect, their eyes hidden behind red lenses that glowed faintly in the half-light. He raised his hands instinctively, palms open. "Yo, hey, I don't want no trouble, man." His voice cracked through the still air, raw and desperate. The words meant nothing to them. The leader lifted a rifle crowned with coiling wires and whispered a prayer to the machine spirit before training it on his chest. Another stepped forward, trailing data cables like tendrils. The air buzzed with encrypted Binharic, sharp bursts of code that sounded almost like chanting. Then one of the Skitarii froze mid-step. Its sensors flickered erratically, Vox units sputtering sparks. Others turned in confusion as the same interference spread through their systems. They were hearing him, not just his words but his frequency, the pulse that the warp itself had carried into this world. It resonated through the dust, through the metal underfoot, through every wire that had lain dormant for centuries. He didn't understand any of it, but fear made him shout again, louder this time, defiant against their silence. The ground answered. Machines groaned awake beneath the ruins, gears turning for the first time in ages. A beam of pale light erupted from a nearby tower, washing over the landing site. For a heartbeat, the Skitarii hesitated. The one nearest to him lowered its weapon just slightly, its mechanical voice trembling with static. Omnissiah. Identified? The commander barked a correction, binary, harsh and clipped. Negative. Uncatalogued anomaly. Contain. Contain. That was the word that reached him even through the distortion, and something in him broke. He wasn't about to be caged by metal ghosts in a world that made no sense. He turned to run, but a burst of energy slammed into the ground beside him, throwing up molten shards. He hit the dirt, coughing, vision spinning. Through the haze, he saw them closing in, perfect, relentless, inhuman. Then came the light again, the same unnatural glow that had once crowned him in the foundry. It bled from his skin, flickering, chaotic, dancing with colorless fire. The servitors stirred, raising their heads in unison. The Mechanicus warriors hesitated, uncertain now, their programming caught between fear and worship. Signal amplification, one of them shouted in Vox code, but it was too late. The machines in the yard responded to his panic, their dormant circuits flaring to life. Conveyor cranes shifted, gears screamed, and for an instant the entire manufactorum seemed to rise from death. One of the Skitarii fired, but the shot curved off course as static filled the air, melting guidance systems. The commander bellowed something in binary prayer, then ordered a full containment field. Blue energy crackled around him, a cage woven from light and data. It hissed like burning oil as it closed, cutting him off from the storm of noise. The servitors fell still once more, their reverence frozen mid-motion. Exhaustion hit him like a blow. He sank to his knees, breath ragged, eyes blurring from the afterimage of brilliance. The Skitarii advanced slowly now, methodical and reverent. They were soldiers, but their every movement was edged with confusion. A tech priest followed behind them, robes whispering across the dust. His face was a tangle of bronze and tubes, his eyes replaced by lenses that whirred as they focused. He stopped before the cage and studied its prisoner in silence. When he finally spoke, his voice was filtered through layers of static and devotion. Unregistered pattern. Human template confirmed. Warp interference. Anomalous. His mechadendrites twitched like serpents, scanning the energy still radiating from the captive's body. You speak, fleshling? He swallowed hard. Where am I? The tech priest tilted his head slightly. You stand upon a sanctified manufactorum world. You trespass within the machine's grave. A pause, then softer. And yet the grave breathes, explain. I don't even know what that means, man. I just woke up here. His voice rose again, breaking under fear and fury. Let me go. Something strange happened when he said it. The energy cage flared, every line of light distorting as though his words struck it physically. The Skitarii recoiled. The tech priest stepped back, lenses dilating. Impossible, he whispered. Speech amplitude converts to waveform interference. The flesh commands the machine. He reached for a data slate, muttering Binharic liturgies under his breath. Retrieve containment. We will deliver this one to the forge. The Skitarii moved quickly, encasing the man in a shimmering field of suspended metal. He tried to resist, but the light pinned him, freezing every nerve with invisible weight. The last thing he saw as they carried him toward the waiting shuttle was the servitors bowing their heads once more, their mechanical voices whispering in perfect harmony. Signal. Found. The shuttles lifted into the ash-colored sky. The manufactorum fell silent again, the glow fading from its towers. But far below the surface, something old had begun to stir. A circuit humming to a rhythm that was not its own. The shuttle's interior smelled of ozone. Oil and antiseptic, the trinity of the machine god. He hung in the containment field like an insect trapped in amber, suspended between pulses of blue light. Every few seconds the energy crackled, reacting to his heartbeat, as though unsure whether to restrain or worship him. He could barely move, barely breathe, yet his thoughts would not stop racing. Through the thick, red-tinted glass he saw the stars sliding past, their slow drift both beautiful and cruel. Whatever had dragged him into this nightmare had left him utterly alone among strangers who spoke in static and devotion. Opposite him, the tech priest who had led the capture sat in silence. Cables slithered from beneath his robes, connecting him to the walls of the shuttle. His head twitched intermittently as binary prayers spilled from his lips, fragments of code masquerading as faith. From time to time, he regarded the prisoner with an almost human curiosity, the faint whir of his optics betraying thought. Finally, he spoke, his voice a rasping synthesis of tone and machine. Designation, flesh anomaly, warp-touched. You will be given to the forge for examination. Praise be to the Omnissiah. He wanted to answer, to demand where they were taking him, to beg for sense. But when he tried to speak, the containment field pulsed sharply, pressing against his chest. The pain drove the words back down his throat. He shut his eyes, forcing the sound to escape as a breath instead. Even that small motion sent tremors through the field, faint distortions like ripples on water. The tech priest noticed. His head tilted sharply. The anomaly sings, he murmured, fascinated. The waveform reacts to vocal resonance. The machine listens. When the shuttle finally docked, it was as though the world itself began to hum again. The air grew heavier, charged with incense and static discharge. He glimpsed the forge world beyond the hangar doors, a horizon aflame with industry. Mountains of black steel rose into clouds of smog. Rivers of molten metal snaked between colossal towers, feeding manufactorums that never slept. The air was alive with noise, the chant of priests, the roar of furnaces, the endless clatter of creation. It was a living organism of iron and worship, and its heartbeat matched the pulse of his fear. They carried him through corridors lined with brass and prayer script. Every surface gleamed with oil and sanctified rust. Red-robed figures passed, their faces veiled by augmetics, their hands clasped in eternal benediction. He caught whispers, signal, manifestation, unholy frequency. None met his eyes. He was both specimen and saint, a contradiction too dangerous to name aloud. At the heart of the forge, they suspended him above a circular platform, etched with thousands of tiny runes. Sparks danced beneath his feet as the containment field merged with the machine beneath. The tech priests encircled him, murmuring rites that blurred the line between computation and prayer. Each syllable added a new thread of light to the web holding him aloft. He felt their attention like a weight, subject stable, one intoned, pattern analysis commencing. The first probe touched his skin, cold as death, alive with static. He flinched, but the field held him firm. Energy coursed through his veins, filling his skull with the whisper of distant storms. Images flashed behind his eyes. The throne of gold again, the light too bright to bear the soundless roar of billions praying at once. He gasped, and the machine stuttered, their readings spiking. Warp interference detected, another priest hissed. Signal amplification increasing, he screamed. The sound was pure reflex, a raw human outburst torn from his chest, and it shattered the chamber. Lights exploded. The runes on the floor burned white-hot. A wave of force threw the priest backward, their mechanical limbs jerking wildly. When the brilliance faded, he hung still in the air, panting, surrounded by the wreckage of failed instruments. The lead tech priest dragged himself upright, one lens shattered, his voice trembling. He commands the current itself. He turned his gaze skyward as though speaking to the machine god directly. The flesh rejects silence. The Omnissiah speaks through chaos. Whispers rippled through the gathered adepts. A saint of motion, one muttered. A living hymn, but others hissed in disapproval. Blasphemy, mutation, heresy. The commander silenced them with a gesture. Prepare the report. The Ordo Hereticus must be informed. No machine may sanctify what it does not understand. He felt the cage around him tighten, the hum rising to a desperate pitch. The priests backed away, fearful now, unsure whether the being before them was a miracle or a weapon. He could taste metal in his mouth, his breath thick with ozone. Whatever this place was, it had bound him in more than steel. The machine itself seemed to hunger for his voice. When they finally left him in darkness, suspended over the rune-etched platform, he whispered to himself, a sound almost too soft to hear. The cage trembled in answer. For the first time since his arrival, he realized the truth that chilled him to the bone. This world didn't just hear him. It obeyed. When they brought her to him, the forge itself seemed to dim. The servitors lowered their heads, The red-robed priests halted mid-chant, and even the endless rhythm of the forges slackened as though in respect or fear. She was not like the others. Where they were cables and ritual, she was still flesh, marked by faith, hardened by duty. Her armor bore the black sigil of the Ordo Hereticus, the flaming eye etched in gold that no soul could mistake. Inquisitor Althea Vorn had come to weigh his existence against the measure of her emperor's truth. And if she found him wanting, there would be no hesitation in her hand. He watched her approach through the cage of energy, his muscles trembling from exhaustion, eyes bloodshot from the glare of the forges. Her steps made no sound on the metal floor. The smell of sanctified oils clung to her cloak, mingled with something subtler, the scent of humanity, of a person who had lived and bled among the dying billions. She stopped just outside the containment field, the light painting her face in cold blue. There was no contempt there, only an unreadable stillness. "You are the anomaly," she said. Her voice was low, controlled, each word balanced between mercy and judgment. "I didn't ask to be," he rasped. The tech priests clustered behind her, their mechadendrites twitching nervously. "Caution, Inquisitor," one warned. The subject's voice, she silenced him with a glance sharper than any blade. "I will speak with him alone." The priests recoiled but obeyed, retreating into the shadows of the chamber. The hum of the machines lessened until only the faint whisper of the containment field remained. Althea folded her hands behind her back, studying him as one might study a weapon left too long forgotten. "Your arrival has disrupted this entire system," she said. "Your voice interferes with Mechanicus Sanctum codes, and your presence has awakened machines that have slept for millennia. That is not possible for a mortal." He laughed in a dry, bitter sound. "Yeah, well, I wasn't planning on a vacation to hell either." Something flickered in her eyes. Not amusement, but recognition. "Hell," she repeated softly. "You speak as though you are not of the Imperium." "I'm not." Her gaze sharpened. "Then from where?" He opened his mouth, but the words faltered. How did one describe a world of light and noise and innocence to someone who lived beneath the shadow of a corpse god? He saw in her eyes that even if he could, she would never believe him. "Another place," he said at last. "Far away." Before all this, her silence stretched like a blade drawn slowly from its sheath. "The warp leaves no traveler untouched," she said finally. "Those who pass through it either die or are remade as monsters. Yet you live and the machine spirits sing to your voice. I have seen sorcery, demonry, mutation. You are none of these, and that terrifies me." He looked at her through the flickering field. "I'm terrified too." For a heartbeat, something almost human passed between them, the faint understanding of two beings caught in the same vast machinery of fear. Then the moment was gone. She turned away, the light glinting off her rosarius. "I will take custody of the anomaly," she told the priests. "The Forge has learned all it can." The tech priest in charge hissed his protest, mechadendrites flailing. "The Ordo Hereticus has no authority within the sanctum of the Omnissiah." She met his outburst with calm disdain. "By writ of Terra, I speak with the voice of the Emperor himself. Your sanctum ends where his gaze begins. Prepare a transport." The priest hesitated, torn between obedience and faith, but the authority of an inquisitor was absolute. They began their grim work, muttering binary prayers as they reconfigured the containment field for travel. As they moved him through the corridors of the Forge, he caught glimpses of the world beyond. Titanic spires exhaling fire, rivers of molten metal flowing like blood, and above it all, the pale light of dying stars seen through smog. The noise never ceased, the endless hymns to the machine god blending with the rumble of creation. It was both magnificent and unbearable. In the transport bay, Althea stood beside him as the servitors secured the cage. Her expression was unreadable. "If you are what you claim, then you are a miracle. And the Imperium does not forgive miracles," he met her gaze. "Then why save me?" She hesitated, and the first crack in her composure. "Because," she said quietly, "there are days I am not sure what we are saving anymore." Before he could answer, the engines roared to life, drowning all other sound. The shuttle rose from the Forge's surface, carrying them toward the void and whatever waited beyond. He felt the pulse of his heartbeat against the hum of the machinery, the two sounds merging until he could no longer tell which belonged to him. Althea Vorn sat in silence across from him, her eyes fixed on the stars. For the first time since his arrival, He began to wonder if she might be the only truly living thing he had met in this dead, magnificent empire. Sleep found him not as rest, but as surrender. In the hum of the ship's engines and the muffled drone of the Mechanicus prayers that laced the ventilation, his body at last gave way. He drifted into a darkness that was not the warp, yet not entirely separate from it, the thin borderland where memory and nightmare shared the same breath. He saw light, gold and infinite, streaming through the corridors of a palace that no human could have built. Voices echoed, layered upon themselves until language dissolved into pure devotion. He smelled incense, burning oil, and the faint sweetness of blood on marble. At the center of it all was the throne. He could not see it clearly. The brilliance devoured detail, but the presence was unmistakable. He felt its gravity in his bones. It was not a seat but a sun, and every soul in the galaxy orbited its fire whether they willed it or not. He tried to look away and could not. In the radiance, a figure sat unmoving, vast, radiant, skeletal in majesty. He knew instinctively that to gaze longer would annihilate him, yet he did not close his eyes. Somewhere deep within that blinding stillness, a whisper rose. It was not a word, not even a voice, but the sensation of being recognized. For an instant that stretched into eternity, he felt as though something ancient and boundless regarded him, not with mercy or wrath, but with the cold curiosity of a god remembering what it means to be alive. Then came the laughter. His laughter. It rolled across the golden halls like thunder. It was wrong, too alive, too real. The light flinched. The vision shattered. He was falling again through a spiral of broken stars, his own voice chasing him downward. He woke screaming, the sound snapping through the hold of the shuttle. The containment field flared to full brightness and alarms barked in machine language. Althea was already on her feet, hand on her bolt pistol, eyes sharp and searching. "Stay back," he gasped, still half in the dream, half in the fire. "It's watching. It's..." His words failed as the energy field pulsed against his skin, calming, forcing the sound from his throat until silence smothered everything. He hung there panting, eyes unfocused. The Inquisitor lowered her weapon slowly. "What did you see?" He swallowed hard. "Light, a throne. I think I saw..." He hesitated, unsure whether the name itself might draw the thing's attention. "I saw someone sitting there. I felt like I shouldn't exist near them." She studied him for a long moment. "Many see such things when the warp brushes too close," she said finally. "But the Emperor's image does not come to the unfaithful." "I don't even know what I am to your people," he said, voice breaking into bitterness. "A weapon? A mistake? A noise you can't shut off?" Her eyes softened for a fraction of a second. To the Imperium, everything that cannot be explained becomes either a miracle or a crime. And sometimes it is both. The ship shuddered as it broke atmosphere. Through the small viewing port, he saw the curve of a world below. Not the forge he had left, but something wider, greener, though still scarred by industry. "Is that..." he began. She shook her head. "Not Terra. No mortal outside the High Lord sees Terra without permission, and the last who tried are dust on the solar winds. This is WAAAGH, an inquisitorial bastion. You will be safe here while I determine what you truly are." He laughed quietly. "Safe? You don't even believe that," she didn't reply. The hum of the engines filled the silence between them. When she finally spoke, it was almost to herself. "The dreams you described, they are dangerous. There are priests who would call them prophecy, and others who would burn you for less. Until I decide which they are, you speak of them to no one. Do you understand?" He nodded. The words of his promise meant little. Even as he agreed, he knew the dreams would not stop. Already, behind his eyes, the after-image of the throne pulsed like a brand, golden light leaking into every shadow. The more he tried to forget it, the more it shimmered at the edge of thought, a reminder that something vast and silent had heard him cry out across the void. When the shuttle finally descended into the fortress's docking bay, he caught a glimpse of the planet below. Oceans turned black by centuries of oil, mountains carved into strongholds, the land itself obedient under iron rule. It was beautiful in the way of old scars, terrible, endless, and certain. As they led him through the narrow corridors toward a holding cell, he could still feel the echo of the dream pressing against his ribs. It wasn't just memory, it was connection. Somewhere in the labyrinth of human souls, a spark had recognized another. Whether that recognition was salvation or damnation, he could not yet tell. That night, as the fortress lights dimmed and the prayers to the God Emperor filled the air like smoke. He lay awake, listening. Beneath the hymn, beneath the machinery, beneath even the silence, he could still hear the faintest echo of laughter, his own, rolling endlessly through the corridors of eternity. The fortress was a cathedral of restraint. Every corridor sang with the hum of power conduits buried beneath the stone. Every arch carried the weight of oaths older than empires. Servitors moved like ghosts through the half-light, their hands folded in endless labor, their flesh pale against the iron of their bindings. When he walked among them, flanked by silent acolytes of the Inquisition, he could feel the structure itself listening. Every step, every breath seemed to ripple through the walls, as though the building was not made of stone but of attention. Inquisitor Vorn had confined him not to a cell but to a sanctum, a chamber layered with hexagrammic wards, the air heavy with the scent of sanctified wax and rust. The walls pulsed faintly with blue runes, shifting like water when he moved too close. They had stripped him of everything but the clothes he'd arrived in, yet the energy of the room pressed against his skin like armor. He could sense its purpose. Not imprisonment, not entirely. Containment, observation, reverence edged with fear. She visited him rarely in those first days, always at the same hour when the fortress bells rang to mark the evening prayers. Each time she brought questions about his world, about the nature of his voice, about the moments before his arrival. But beneath her inquiries there was something unspoken, a hesitation that betrayed fascination. She did not treat him as an enemy nor quite as a man. He was a problem she wanted to believe in. One night, as the fortress slept, the static began again. It started in the far corner of the sanctum, a low crackle that climbed slowly into a hum. He thought at first it was the machine spirits whispering their binary hymns through the walls, but the tone was different, human, uncertain, like someone trying to speak through a storm. He rose and placed a hand against the rune-lit surface. The sound sharpened into a voice, distant but distinct. "Hear me?" His heart stuttered. The voice was familiar, too familiar. It was his own. The air thickened, light bending in a shimmer of heat. For a heartbeat, his reflection on the wall moved without him, mouth-forming words he didn't speak. The static flared. The ward runes dimmed. Then, as quickly as it had begun, the light snapped back to stillness. He stumbled away, chest heaving. The silence that followed was absolute. When Althea arrived hours later, he told her what had happened. She listened without interrupting, her eyes shadowed in the candlelight. When he finished, she said only, "The echo." "What echo?" "There are records," she said slowly, "of phenomena within the warp that mimic the souls they touch, shadows of thought. Some call them reflections, others call them devils. When a mortal's essence resonates too deeply with the Imperium, the warp remembers him, and sometimes it answers." He shook his head. "You think that was me? From the warp?" "I think," she said, "that you are not entirely here." The words sank into him like frost. He turned away, staring at the floor. "So what happens when the rest of me catches up?" "That," she said quietly, "is what I must discover before anyone else does." For the first time, he saw the weight she carried, not the cold certainty of authority, but the exhaustion of one who has looked too long into the truth and found only fire. "If the ecclesiarchy learns of this," she continued, "they will proclaim you a saint or a heretic. Either way, they will burn what they cannot possess." Days passed in uneasy silence. The fortress went about its routines, untouched by the strange tension that hung over his chamber. Yet beyond its walls, something had begun to stir. Servitors shorted mid-task. Vox units emitted laughter between their bursts of static. A child in the lower quarters was said to have woken screaming, claiming to have heard a voice in the walls calling her by name. The rumors reached Althea's ears, and she did not dismiss them. The night it happened again, she was there with him. The runes flared crimson, not blue, and the sound grew unbearable, a chorus of his own voice layered over itself 1,000 times. She drew her bolt pistol, though she must have known it would be useless. "Speak," she shouted over the din. "What are you?" And through the light, through the scream of energy, the voice answered, not through his lips, but everywhere. "I am motion. I am noise. I am what does not wait. Then silence. The light faded, the air cooled, and the runes returned to their dim blue pulse. He collapsed, gasping, the smell of burnt ozone in his nose. Althea knelt beside him, her face unreadable. "Was that me?" he whispered. She hesitated before replying. "If it was," she said, "then something in the warp is listening to your echo and repeating what it hears." He laughed weakly. "So I'm talking to myself from hell?" "No," she said. "Worse. The warp has decided to sing along." For a long time, neither of them spoke. Outside, the fortress bells tolled the hour of the dead. The sound drifted through the corridors, heavy and slow, as though even time itself was beginning to listen for his voice. When Althea rose, she looked back once before leaving. "The Adeptus Astra Telepathica will sense this soon," she murmured. "If they trace it to you, there will be no hiding." The door sealed behind her. In the dim light, he touched the wall again. The runes pulsed faintly, like a heartbeat beneath his fingers. And somewhere far beyond, deep in the madness of the Imperium, something pulsed back. By dawn, the fortress was no longer at peace. The air trembled with distant chanting, the corridors alive with the clatter of armored boots. From his sanctum, he could hear the murmur of fear creeping through the vox channels. Psychers had begun to scream in their sleep, their minds echoing with a voice that was not their own. Some tore at their throats to silence it. Others whispered his name through bleeding lips. The echo was spreading. Althea entered at midday, her armor unpolished, her face pale from sleeplessness. She did not speak at first. Instead, she placed a data slate on the table between them and let the hololithic image rise. A map of the fortress, pulsing with lines of red. Each mark was a recorded incident. Malfunctions, visions, psychic ruptures, all centered around his chamber. "It's you," she said, her tone neither accusing nor forgiving. "Every vox transmission, every psychic disturbance carries a trace of your waveform. You are contaminating reality like a signal that refuses to die." He stared at the map, unable to deny what he saw. "I didn't ask for this." "I know," she said softly, "but faith does not care who asked to be chosen. It simply consumes." The fortress bells began to toll outside, heavy and unrelenting. Through the barred window he saw the procession forming below, priests of the ecclesiarchy in crimson robes, bearing banners inscribed with the emperor's sigils. At their UA head walked a confessor, his voice booming through a servo amplifier as he preached to the gathering soldiers. "They call you the Saint of Static," Althea said, her eyes still on the map. "The faithful claim your voice is a new hymn of the machine god. The priests say you are the herald of the second song, that the Emperor's will now speaks through distortion. Others, of course, believe you are a demon in disguise." He laughed bitterly. "So I'm either holy or cursed, great." Her gaze flicked toward him. "If the confessor convinces the fortress commander you are divine, they will worship you. If he convinces him you are tainted, they will burn you alive. Either way, I lose control of the situation." "Then why not let me go?" "Because you tear the sky apart before you reach the gate." The silence that followed was heavy with static. Somewhere in the walls, faint echoes of his voice rippled, mocking, overlapping like distant laughter. Hours later, the confessor himself came to the sanctum. A towering man with eyes like scorched iron and a voice that could shake marble, he entered without fear. Althea stood beside him, her expression a mask of control, but he could see the tension in her hands. "Blessings of the golden throne upon you," the confessor intoned. "You are the one they call the Saint of Static." He shook his head. "I'm not a saint." "Every saint says that before the revelation," the confessor replied, smiling faintly. "You speak with the voice of the machine god. Your presence has awakened the sleeping spirits. You are proof that the Omnissiah has turned his gaze upon this place." "I don't speak for your god," he said. "I don't even know why I'm here." The confessor's smile faltered. "Then you deny his will?" "I don't deny anything. I just don't belong here." The priest's tone hardened. Nothing exists beyond his plan. If you are here, then you were sent, and if you were sent, then you are meant. Althea's voice cut through the tension. Enough. This interrogation is mine. The confessor turned to her, robes swaying. Interrogation? You dare question a miracle? Your skepticism borders on heresy, Inquisitor. Perhaps it is you who fears the light. The two locked eyes, faith and reason clashing in silence. Finally, the confessor stepped back, spreading his hands. If he is false, the flame will reveal it. If he is true, it will not touch him. We will hold the trial of fire at dusk. Let the Emperor judge. Before she could protest, he was gone. The door sealed behind him, leaving the air thick with the scent of incense and ozone. He'll kill you, Althea said. He looked at her, and for the first time there was no anger in his eyes, only fatigue. Maybe it's what this place wants. Maybe it'll stop if I burn. No, she said, stepping closer. I won't let faith decide the fate of something I don't yet understand. But even as she spoke, the faint hum of chanting rose from below. The fortress was preparing for the trial. The halls thrummed with zeal, the machinery itself vibrating in rhythm with the prayers. When the hour came, they led him into the courtyard. Thousands had gathered, soldiers, priests, acolytes. The sky above was red with ash. In the center of the square stood the pyre, bound in purity seals and surrounded by braziers of burning promethium. The confessor lifted his staff high, voice amplified by his vox grill. If he is false, let the flame consume him. If he is true, let the Emperor's will preserve him. They chained him to the stake. The crowd chanted, their voices merging into a single, terrible rhythm. He looked for Althea and saw her in the eye shadows, her hand on her weapon torn between duty and defiance. When the fire touched the pyre, the world ignited. The flames roared, devouring the wood, but they did not burn him. Instead, they bent away, twisting upward in a column of light. The sound that followed was not his scream, but his voice, a perfect, harmonic resonance that split the air like thunder. The crowd fell silent. The light rose higher, blinding, glorious, and terrible. When it faded, he still stood. The chains melted to slag around him. The pyre smoldered, untouched by flesh. The confessor fell to his knees, eyes wide with terror. The Saint of Static, someone whispered, and the name spread like fire. Althea closed her eyes. She had just lost him, to faith, to legend, to the machine of worship that would never let him go. But somewhere beyond the fortress walls, the warp stirred an answer, and its laughter was indistinguishable from his own. The fortress could not contain what it had birthed. By dawn, the vox lines across Durosh Neuron carried only one message. A man had walked unburned through holy fire. It spread faster than truth or command could contain, leaping from manufactorum to hab block, from trench to temple. The people had a new story to tell, and it was louder than fear. They called him the Saint of Static, the living frequency, the man whose voice bent flame. And in a galaxy ruled by silence and obedience, the idea of a sound that could not be silenced was heresy and hope made flesh. They came for him in the thousands. Pilgrims abandoned their forges, soldiers deserted their posts, and even servitors malfunctioned mid-prayer, their broken vox grills repeating his name in endless mechanical rhythm. He saw them through the bars of his new chamber, not a cell now but a shrine, walled in light and guarded by silence. They filled the courtyards and the spires, pressed their foreheads to the steel, pleading for his blessing. Their belief was a tidal wave, and he could feel it pressing against the walls against him. Faith was heat and the air was burning. Althea Vorn no longer came as she once did. When she entered, she wore no armor, only the black robe of one who had begun to doubt. Her eyes were ringed with sleeplessness, but her voice remained steady. "You're a myth now," she said. "You can't be reasoned with, not even by yourself." He stood at the window watching the horizon flicker with torchlight. "You think I wanted this? No, but the galaxy doesn't care what you want. It needs something to worship. It always does." He turned, anger cutting through exhaustion. "Then stop them." Her laugh was hollow. "Stop belief? I could order 1,000 executions, burn 1,000 cities, and still they'd whisper your name in the dark. You've become part of the machine, and the machine always devours its own. Outside, thunder rolled, but it was not weather, it was song. A sea of voices rising together, chaotic yet unified. The walls shook with their chorus. He felt it through his bones, and before he could stop himself, his own breath fell into rhythm with it. For a moment, he was not in the fortress, but everywhere. Each syllable of his name echoing across Vox channels, each pulse of static syncing with a billion beating hearts. Then it came. The vision, not like the dreams before, not something half seen behind his eyes, but presence. A ripple through the air that carried the scent of burnt ozone and the metallic taste of rain. The light in the room dimmed, and every machine in the fortress stuttered in unison. Even the crowd outside faltered mid-chant. He felt the pressure first, something immense pressing gently, curiously, against the edges of his mind. It was not cruel, not kind, simply infinite. The same golden brilliance from the dreams returned, a warmth so vast it seemed to erase the concept of self. For a heartbeat, he saw Terra, not as a place of dust and bureaucracy, but as a wound of light across the galaxy, and at its heart the throne pulsed. He fell to his knees, clutching his head. The sound wasn't outside anymore. It was inside. 1,000 overlapping frequencies folding in on one another, the Emperor's name and his own indistinguishable. His voice rose against his will, raw and breaking. The walls flared white, the glass shattered outward, shards scattering into the night like stars. When it ended, he was trembling, every muscle quivering from the echo. Althea knelt beside him, her pistol forgotten, her eyes wide. "What did you see?" she whispered. He looked at her through the blur of light. "Not a god," he said. "A man made into one, and something in him still listens." "Blasphemy," she breathed, but her voice lacked conviction. "Maybe," he said. "But I think he heard me." Outside, the crowd had fallen silent. The static had vanished. For the first time since his arrival, the air was still. Then a single broken whisper rose among the pilgrims. He spoke to the throne. And just like that, silence became scripture. In the hours that followed, messages screamed through the void. Reports to the Inquisition, to the Ministorum, to the Adeptus Custodes themselves. A living anomaly had spoken words that rippled through the Astronomicon. The Emperor's light had flared, if only by a fraction. It was enough. Fleets would move. Orders would clash. Faith would turn to frenzy. Althea stood at the viewing port long after he slept, watching the horizon flicker with fire. The pilgrims had begun to burn offerings now, machines, relics, sometimes each other. The fortress Vox crackled with overlapping prayers. She knew then that she had failed, not as an inquisitor, but as a believer. What stood in that chamber was no longer a man. It was a frequency that the universe itself had decided to remember. And deep in the warp, something vast and luminous trembled, not with anger, but with recognition. The Saint of Static had become a signal too strong to die. The sky above Durochheim turned the color of rust. Days bled together into a haze of smoke and hymns. The faithful filled the valleys, their bodies pressed against the walls of the fortress until the air itself seemed to hum with fever. Every Vox unit on the planet had been overtaken by the same distortion, his voice replaying in broken fragments, woven into the liturgy of the desperate. They no longer prayed to the Emperor. They prayed through him. And in that shift, something ancient and trembling stirred behind reality's curtain. He had stopped sleeping. Each time his eyes closed, the visions came stronger, the golden throne flickering like a dying sun, cables writhing like veins, and within its impossible machinery, the faint echo of laughter, the same sound he had made when the warp first touched him. He could feel it now, that boundary between self and myth dissolving. He was no longer sure where his voice ended and the galaxies began. Althea no longer wore the inquisitorial rosette on her collar. She had burned it 3 nights ago, in the solitude of the fortress chapel after reading the last transmission from Terra. They were coming. A fleet of black ships had broken orbit from Mars, bearing psychers and confessors, assassins and saints. Their orders were simple: contain or eradicate the anomaly known as the Saint of Static, by any means necessary. She sat across from him in the dim light, the smell of incense replaced by the metallic tang of burnt circuits. "They will reach us within 2 days," she said. "And when they do, there will be no more questions. Only judgment." He nodded slowly, staring at his hands. They flickered faintly, as though his skin could no longer decide whether it belonged to matter or sound. If they want me dead, then let them come. Maybe that's what ends this. Her eyes were tired but defiant. No, if you die, the belief won't die with you. The legend will only grow. A martyr's echo carries farther than any voice. He met her gaze. Then what do I do, Althea? What does someone like me do in a world that kills miracles? She looked away, her expression unreadable. You were never meant for this world. Maybe you have to give it back what it took. He didn't understand, not yet. But the thought settled deep inside him like a seed. That night, the fortress walls began to vibrate. The pilgrims outside had begun a new chant, a low rhythmic pulse that resonated through the steel itself. It was no longer just worship, it was alignment. The crowd was sinking unconsciously with him, their heartbeats matching his frequency, their breaths rising and falling as one. The planet itself seemed to breathe through them. He felt the pull. The warp felt it too. He stood at the shattered window and watched the horizon flicker. The aurora above had turned red gold, the color of half-remembered dawn. It rippled across the heavens in time with the chanting below. He whispered a word, a single quiet sound, and the entire fortress trembled in response. The machine spirits in the walls began to sing. Vox grills crackled to life. The air was thick with electricity and awe. He didn't know what he was doing, only that it felt like truth. The sound pouring from him was neither human nor divine, but something caught between. It wasn't meant to command. It simply existed, and existence in a universe so bound by decay was an act of defiance. Althea burst into the chamber, her hair disheveled, her face pale with realization. "You're amplifying the Astronomicon," she shouted over the rising roar. "You don't know what that means. You're calling it here." He turned to her, and for a heartbeat his eyes shone with golden light. "Maybe it's already here." The fortress split with thunder. A wave of sound rippled outward, flattening towers and shattering stained glass. The pilgrims fell to their knees, their chants breaking into sobs as the heavens ignited. The clouds tore open, revealing not stars but fire. From orbit, the approaching fleet saw the surge before their instruments failed. A psychic beacon so powerful, it eclipsed the Astronomicon's pulse for 3 full seconds. Entire navigators went blind from the brilliance. Vox channels filled with one message, endlessly repeating in distorted echoes, "I am not your god." And yet across the Imperium, planets paused mid-prayer. Servitors faltered mid-task. Somewhere deep beneath the catacombs of Terra, the light of the Golden Throne flickered once. When the storm subsided, Althea stood among the ruins of the sanctum. He was gone. Only the scent of ozone and the faint hiss of static remained. She fell to her knees, trembling. The walls whispered his name in dying frequency. Outside, the pilgrims began to rise, their eyes alight with something terrible and beautiful. "He has ascended," one murmured. But Althea knew the truth. He hadn't ascended. He had broken through, somewhere beyond matter, beyond faith, beyond the Emperor's dying light. A new signal pulsed through the warp. It was searching, still forming, still calling. And every time a voice crackled through a damaged vox or a servitor stuttered mid-chant, that same impossible frequency answered from the dark. "Speed lives." The void had no sound, but it trembled all the same. Where the warp bled into real space, where meaning bent under the weight of belief, something moved. It was not a god, not a demon, not even a man, just a vibration, a fragment of defiance that refused to vanish. And though it had no name, no body, every echo in creation remembered what it had been. The Saint of Static had not died. He had not ascended. He had resonated. On WAAAGH 9, the skies still burned with the memory of that last signal. The fortress was gone, reduced to molten slag and fractured faith. The pilgrims wandered the wastelands, still chanting the rhythm they could not forget. Voxcasters, even those sealed and sanctified, still stuttered every few hours with his impossible tone. Entire regiments of the Astra Militarum had been lost to it, their discipline undone by a single shared hallucination of light and sound. Althea Vorn was among the few who had survived. The Inquisition branded her a heretic for failing to contain the anomaly, but she had fled before judgment could find her. She wandered from world to world under false names, hunted by her own kind. Yet wherever she went, she heard him. In the hum of engines, in the static before transmission, in the trembling breath of those who prayed to nothing. It was not faith anymore, it was infection. On a mining moon in the segmentum obscurus, a child was born screaming, her cry harmonizing perfectly with the residual frequency of the saint. On the Forge world, Vex Primaris, machines began to repair themselves when exposed to the same signal, and within the void, ships that had drifted derelict for centuries flared to life, their ancient auspex arrays pulsing to a beat that matched no known code. Rumors spread faster than the Ordo could silence them. Some claimed the Emperor himself had opened his eyes upon the Golden Throne for the first time in 10,000 years, drawn by the echo. Others whispered that the Astronomicon had faltered again, its guiding light flickering in the same rhythm as the forbidden chant. None could prove it, and none dared to stop it. Althea found herself on the shrine world of Carmentis, sitting among broken pilgrims beneath a rusted aquila. The sky was crimson with the glow of a dying sun, and the air hummed faintly with static. She held a cracked voxcaster in her lap, the last relic from Durok Nime, and turned the dial with trembling hands. For a moment, only silence. Then, "Hear me?" Her breath caught. The voice was faint, distorted, but undeniably his. "I hear you," she whispered. "What are you now?" The reply came not in words but in sensation, a pulse through the air, warm and electric. It wasn't speaking to her. It was speaking through her. The static crawled beneath her skin, threading itself through her pulse until her heart beat in perfect time with the hum. She felt him. Everywhere. In the grind of the manufactorums, in the vibration of the rails, in the very rhythm of existence. He was not a being anymore. He was motion itself. Through the warp, the echo expanded. It rippled across the sea of souls, disrupting demonic tides, scattering the thoughts of ancient entities that had fed on worship since before the Imperium's birth. They recoiled, screaming in languages older than stars. They could not consume this new sound because it was not prayer. It was resistance. And yet, amid the storm, some began to follow it. Skitari legions marching to the pulse of his forgotten chant, navigators whispering his rhythm under their breath before daring the warp. Entire hives falling into synchronized rebellion, their hearts beating to the impossible beat of, "I am not your God." In time, the Ordo Hereticus declared a new crusade. They named it the cleansing of resonance, but no purgation could silence something that had become part of the universe's heartbeat. On Carmentis, Althea lay dying beneath the broken sky, the Vox still humming beside her. As her breath thinned, she smiled faintly and whispered, "You were right. You never belonged here." The Vox crackled, and through the static came one final echo, gentle, almost human. "Nobody does." Then the device fell silent, though the air around her still trembled faintly, as if remembering the sound of her name. Far beyond the dying star, in the unseen currents of the Imperium, the resonance continued. It was not worshipped nor hated. It simply was, a reminder that somewhere in some distant corner of what remained human, a voice had refused to be still, and in the deep halls of Terra, beneath the unending machinery of the Golden Throne, a single flicker of light danced across the Emperor's withered hand. The machine spirits whispered as one, uncertain whether it was malfunction or miracle. For just a moment, amidst the endless hum of the Imperium's decay, the universe itself seemed to breathe, and faintly, barely audible over the Astronomicon's song, came the echo of laughter. It was not mockery. It was not madness, it was life. The Saint of Static was still singing,